Hey there, friends. Some stories grab your heart from the very first moment. This one starts on a misty Oregon morning, a desperate cry from beneath the sand, a woman named Claire who simply couldn't walk away, and a rescue that would change both their lives. If you've ever needed hope or a reason to believe in second chances, this is for you. Drop a comment, hit like or subscribe if it moves you, and let's dive right in. Have you ever heard a cry so desperate it rattles your bones? That kind of sound isn't easy to forget, especially on a morning like this. The fog rolled in thick over Cannon Beach, Oregon, blurring the line between sand and sky. The hush so complete you could almost hear your own regrets echoing back at you. That's where Claire's story began, or I should say, where everything started to unravel. Now, I don't know about you, but some mornings just feel heavier than others. Maybe it's the silence, or maybe it's the weight of memories you can't quite shake. For Claire, a former Army medic with hands that still trembled from wars most of us have only seen in movies, this was supposed to be a day like any other. A quiet walk before dawn, breathing in the sea air, trying for once to find a moment's peace. But fate, if you believe in such things, had other plans. The first sign that something was wrong was a frantic, muffled barking cutting through the mist. Sharp. Desperate. It wasn't the sound of a happy dog greeting the day. It was the kind of sound that makes you stop in your tracks, makes the hair rise on the back of your neck. Have you ever felt that chill when you just know something's terribly wrong, long before you understand what it is? Claire did. She stopped, listened. The barking came again, weaker this time, like whatever made it was running out of breath or hope or both. I wonder, would you have kept walking? Or would you have gone looking, even if you weren't sure you wanted to find what was there? The sand was disturbed, just a patch, but different enough to catch Claire's eye. Years of field work taught her to trust those small details, the ones other people might miss. She knelt, her hands already shaking, not just from cold, but from something older, deeper. She started to dig. Some folks might call it instinct. Others would say it's muscle memory, the kind that never leaves you even after you try to leave it behind. Her hands clawed at the wet sand, each movement a little more frantic. Every second, the barking grew fainter. And then, her fingers hit fur. She froze. For a moment, all she could hear was her own heartbeat, thundering in her ears. I can't help but wonder, what would you have done? Would you have had the courage to reach into that darkness, to touch something so vulnerable, not knowing if you could help or if it was already too late? Claire pressed on. Her breath came in sharp bursts. Inch by inch, she uncovered a German Shepherd puppy, buried alive. The sight of him, barely breathing, covered in cuts, half blind, his body trembling with exhaustion, was enough to make even the toughest soul falter. Have you ever seen pain so raw it makes you look away? That's what she saw that morning. And yet, Claire didn't look away. She couldn't. With hands more practiced in stopping bleeding than offering comfort, she scooped the puppy up, cradling him against her chest. She whispered words she couldn't even remember later. Maybe a prayer, maybe a promise. Maybe just the sound of someone who couldn't bear to see another living thing give up. Let me ask you, do you think animals can sense when a human is trying to save them? Because the way that puppy clung to life, the way his breath stuttered and then steadied just a little, I swear he knew he was no longer alone. Claire looked around, searching for help, but the beach was empty. The world felt like it was holding its breath. Somewhere inside her, old wounds began to ache. memories of soldiers lost, of friends she couldn't save. But she forced herself to move, to keep going. There was no time for hesitation now. As she stumbled up the beach, clutching the broken puppy to her chest, the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them. The mist pressed in, hiding them from everything else. Every step felt like a mile, her boots sinking in the heavy sand. If you've ever had to carry something precious through the dark, not knowing if you'll make it in time, you know that feeling. The helplessness. The hope that maybe, just this once, the story will have a different ending. Back at the parking lot, her old Jeep sat waiting. Claire slid behind the wheel, fumbling with the keys, her fingers numb. She wrapped the puppy in her jacket, talking to him, maybe to herself, maybe to the universe, urging him to hold on. And there, as the sun finally began to rise, turning the sky the faintest shade of gold, something changed. Maybe it was the way the puppy's eyes flickered open for a second, just long enough to meet hers. Maybe it was the stubborn rhythm of his heart, refusing to quit. All I know is, that moment changed everything. Not just for the dog, but for Claire too. If you've ever rescued someone, or been rescued yourself, you know what I mean. I don't know if you've ever held life and death at the same time. If you have, you'll understand the way every second seems to stretch and snap, the way hope and fear can tangle themselves into one breathless knot. That's where Claire found herself, driving hell-bent up the rain-slick highway toward Seaside's emergency animal hospital, a German shepherd pup bleeding and barely conscious on the seat beside her. Outside, headlights split the Oregon drizzle into shards of light. Inside the Jeep, Claire gripped the wheel with hands that had once steadied wounded soldiers in desert dust. But this was different. She was no longer on patrol. She was utterly alone, the dog's shallow breaths counting down the seconds. What would you have done, racing the clock like that? Would you have talked to the puppy, as Claire did, making shaky promises to a creature who might not hear? Or would you have gone silent, teeth clenched, trying to bargain with fate? "Stay with me, kid," she whispered, over and over, her voice cracking. Maybe she was talking to the dog, maybe to some younger, braver version of herself she thought she'd lost. I wonder, do we ever really leave the battlefields behind? Or do we just carry them into quieter wars? The hospital's neon sign flickered through the gloom, a red cross in a world gone gray. Claire lurched into the parking lot, scooped the limp bundle off the seat, and ran for the door, boots slapping through puddles. If you've ever felt the world tilt beneath your feet, you know that desperate lurch, that sense that nothing else matters except the thing you're holding. Inside, everything blurred. Shouts, lights, the cold sting of antiseptic. Claire forced herself to let go. The nurse's arms were gentle but businesslike, moving fast. There was no guarantee, no soothing promise. Only the reality of a tiny, battered life at the edge. Have you ever waited for news, heart in your throat, knowing all you can do is hope? I have. It's a kind of helplessness that strips you bare. They hustled Scout, Claire would learn his name soon enough, behind swinging doors. For a while, all she could do was sit, jacket soaked through, hands gripping a foam cup of bitter coffee she'd never taste. The rain beat against the windows, a lonely percussion. The world felt impossibly far away. Then, the vet appeared. Dr. Hanley, her face drawn, voice low. There's a tone doctors use when they don't want to say too much, but they won't lie either. Scout, she said, was in critical condition, malnourished, dehydrated. One eye gone, recently, and not cleanly. The wounds weren't accidental. Someone had done this. It's strange, isn't it? How cruelty can shock you even when you think you've seen the worst of people. Claire felt it all over again, that slow, sick anger. But layered under the anger was something colder. Guilt. Why hadn't she come sooner? Why hadn't anyone? Maybe you're wondering what goes through a person's head in those moments. I'll tell you. It's every regret you've ever had. All the things you wish you'd done differently. For Claire, it was the faces of friends lost to violence and neglect. The feeling that she was always a minute too late. She asked the questions anyone would. Was he in pain? Was there a chance? Dr. Hanley didn't sugarcoat it. Scout's injuries were severe. His survival would depend on whether he wanted to fight, and whether someone was willing to fight for him. That's the thing about life on the edge. Sometimes, all it takes is one person who refuses to quit. Claire sat by the window, watching the dawn crawl up over the wet streets. Every time someone came through the doors, her heart leapt. Hope, dread, a wild mix of both. I wonder, if you'd been there, would you have stayed? Or would you have walked away? Told yourself it was someone else's fight? A memory surfaced, unbidden. A night in Afghanistan, the smell of burning diesel and metal, the desperate scramble to save a wounded friend. Claire remembered the weight of someone's life in her hands, the fierce terror that she might not be enough. Now, years later, the faces were different, but the feeling was the same. Hours slipped by. Claire barely noticed the world waking up outside. Nurses came and went. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. In the waiting room, a mother scolded her son for running. Ordinary life. But in Claire's world, time was measured by the beeping of monitors and the trembling breaths of a dog she'd never met until today. When the vet returned, Claire couldn't meet her eyes at first. She braced for the worst. But Dr. Hanley gave a small, tired smile. "He's not out of the woods, but he's fighting," she said. "He's a tough little guy." Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The relief was almost painful. Now, if you've ever loved something fragile, you know that hope can feel dangerous. It's easier sometimes to expect heartbreak. But when Claire was finally allowed to see Scout, tubes and bandages and all, he stirred, just enough to nuzzle her hand. That tiny gesture, that flicker of trust, was enough to crack something open inside her. You ever wonder why some of us are drawn to the broken things? Maybe it's because, deep down, we're trying to save a part of ourselves. I can't help but think, if Claire hadn't stopped, if she'd walked on by, what story would I be telling you now? Sometimes, a whole life hangs by a thread, and we don't even realize it. That's how their journey truly began. One soul battered by war, another by betrayal, both learning in the flickering light of an ICU that hope is never wasted, not while anyone's still willing to fight for it. There's a certain kind of silence that only comes after the adrenaline fades. If you've ever sat in a hospital waiting room while someone you care about is fighting for their life, you'll know what I mean. The quiet isn't peaceful. It's heavy, swollen with all the things you can't say out loud. Fears, regrets, the dull ache of helplessness. Claire sat with her elbows on her knees, staring at the ugly tile floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making the whole world feel gray and too bright at the same time. Her jacket, still damp from the morning rain, clung to her shoulders like another layer of old pain. You ever notice how time moves differently in these places? Minutes stretch, your thoughts grow louder. The world outside keeps turning, but inside, everything is stuck. She caught herself rubbing her palms together, a nervous habit left over from years of trying to shake off the ghosts of Afghanistan. Funny how the mind can loop back to old scars, especially when you're waiting for new ones to form. I wonder, do any of us ever really heal, or do we just learn to live around the broken places? The doors at the end of the hall swung open every now and then, letting in snippets of other people's dramas. A woman with a cat in a carrier, a father cradling a limp-eared spaniel. Their worries were their own, but in this place, pain felt contagious. You start to wonder if you belong to a tribe of the hurting, drawn together by sleepless nights and desperate prayers. Somewhere in the back, Scout was fighting his own quiet battle. Claire didn't know much about him yet, didn't know what his life had been before he ended up buried and broken on a lonely beach. She could only guess at the story written in scars and missing fur. But she understood this. Sometimes survival is an act of defiance. Sometimes just breathing is a kind of bravery. She pressed her hand against the pocket where her old service dog's tag lived, a habit, a kind of private talisman. That dog had been her anchor once, years ago. Now, staring into the unknown, she wondered if she was strong enough to be someone's anchor again. You ever feel like the world is testing you? Like maybe, just maybe, the universe keeps putting you back in the fire to see if you'll break? I can't help but think, if you're reading this, maybe you've known that test too. Hours passed. The hospital TV flashed muted news reports. Another storm off the coast. More trouble in the world. Claire barely noticed. All her attention narrowed to the sound of footsteps, the shadow of a nurse at the end of the hall, the faint scent of disinfectant. When Dr. Hanley appeared, Claire straightened in her chair. The vet's eyes were tired, her scrubs stained. "He made it through the surgery," she said quietly, "but it'll be touch and go for a while." Relief hit Claire like a wave and then receded, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She found herself whispering a thank you, not sure if she meant it for the doctor, the universe, or whatever luck had carried Scout this far. A few hours later, they let her visit. The ICU for animals wasn't much different from the human one. Machines humming, oxygen tanks lined up against the wall, the soft beep of monitors tracing out fragile lives. Scout looked impossibly small against the white sheets. His ribs showed beneath the bandages. One side of his face was swollen, his good eye closed tight. I don't know about you, but seeing pain like that in something so young, it does something to you. Makes you angry and gentle at the same time. Claire reached out slowly. She remembered what the vet had said. He's skittish. Trauma like this, it lingers. She let her hand rest on the edge of the cage, palm open, offering, not demanding. For a long moment, nothing happened, and then, Scout's tail flicked, just once, the tiniest movement, but enough to make Claire's breath catch. Sometimes hope doesn't arrive like a sunrise. Sometimes it's the flick of a tail, the brush of fur against your skin, a reminder that the fight isn't over. You ever seen someone start to trust again after everything's been ripped away? It's never loud or sudden. It's a series of small, trembling steps, each one a risk, each one a victory. That night, Claire didn't go home. She slept in her car outside the hospital, waking every hour to check her phone for updates. The rain tapped a lonely rhythm on the roof. She stared at old photos, her thumb tracing the faded outline of her army squad, the loyal dog sitting at her feet. She wondered, was this fate, or just another hard lesson about caring too much. In the morning, the nurses found her at the coffee machine, eyes swollen from lack of sleep. They offered kind smiles, the kind you give to someone who's walking a path you know too well. Grief, worry, hope, they all leave the same marks. Back in the ICU, Scout was still fighting. His breathing was ragged, his body curled tight as if bracing for another blow. Claire sat beside him, reading aloud from a battered paperback she'd found in her glove box. The words didn't matter. It was the sound of her voice, the promise that he wasn't alone. Sometimes I wonder, do animals understand promises? Or is it just the tone, the way we show up again and again, even when things look hopeless? As the day bled into night, Scout stirred. He blinked his good eye, looked at Claire, and for the briefest moment, there was something like recognition. Not trust, not yet, but the first crack in the wall. If you've ever waited alone in the dark, you know how every second can last forever. But hope, real hope, doesn't shout. It lingers quietly, flickering on the edge of the impossible. And that's where they were. Two souls, both battered, both waiting in the silent room for a reason to keep fighting. Recovery is never a straight line. Anyone who's ever watched a wounded creature try to heal knows that. There are days when it feels like every small gain is wiped away by a single setback, when progress comes only in fits and starts, measured in moments so fragile you're afraid to breathe too hard in case you shatter them. Claire learned this lesson all over again in those early weeks, making her daily pilgrimage to the animal hospital. Scout's room became a kind of sanctuary for both of them, a quiet bubble where the world's noise faded, replaced by the slow, patient work of survival. But if you looked closer, you'd see that peace was hard-won. Fear, like a shadow, clung to everything. Some mornings, Scout refused to eat, turning his head away from the bowl no matter how gently Claire coaxed him. Other days, he'd flinch at the light, at the softest sound, at even the brush of a nurse's sleeve. There were moments when he would press himself into the farthest corner of his cage, shivering so hard you could hear his teeth click. It was as if every cell in his body remembered the darkness, the hands that hurt him, the feeling of being buried and left for dead. I don't know if you've ever tried to win the trust of something that's been broken so thoroughly. It's not like the movies. There's no magic moment, no single act that makes the fear disappear. It's a slow dance. One step forward, two steps back. Every gentle word, every treat offered, every patient silence is a question. Will you let yourself hope again? Sometimes Claire caught herself wondering if she was asking the same thing, not just for Scout, but for herself. She'd spent so long bracing for disappointment, for loss, that kindness almost felt dangerous. The hospital staff noticed too. They'd watch her linger by Scout's cage, talking to him in that low, steady voice, hands tucked in her pockets to keep from reaching too fast. "You're good with him," a nurse remarked one afternoon. Most people would have given up by now. Claire just shrugged. "You can't quit on someone who's still fighting." I have to ask, if you'd been there, seen the way Scout shrank from every outstretched hand, would you have had the patience to stay? Or would you have walked away, told yourself he was too far gone? Sometimes I think it's easier to love the idea of rescue than to live through the gritty, frustrating reality of it. But Claire stayed. She brought blankets that smelled like the sea, read aloud from whatever book she was carrying, played old country songs on her phone so softly it was more vibration than sound. The progress was almost invisible. The way Scout's ears perked when she entered, the rare times he'd eat if she held the bowl. A tail flick, a sigh that sounded less like pain, more like surrender. Still, the vet's prognosis stayed grim. The damage, physical and psychological, was deep. "He may never trust again," Dr. Hanley told Claire quietly. "We see it more often than I'd like. Animals, they know when the world's let them down." There was sympathy in her eyes, but also a warning. Don't hope too hard. But hope is stubborn. It lives in the smallest places, in the soft sound of Scout's breathing, in the slow blink of his good eye. If you've ever been close to giving up, then found yourself clinging to a scrap of hope anyway, you know what I mean. For Claire, each visit pulled old wounds to the surface. She remembered her own trauma, memories of battlefields, of loss, of promises made and broken. Sometimes she'd find herself sitting in her car after leaving the hospital, hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes burning. It was as if saving Scout might, in some impossible way, save the parts of herself she'd locked away. You ever wonder why some people refuse to let go, even when things look hopeless? Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's stubbornness. Or maybe it's the knowledge that if you don't keep showing up, no one else will. One rainy evening, as dusk pressed against the hospital windows, Claire arrived to find Scout curled in his corner, body rigid with fear. She sat outside the cage, not touching, just breathing with him. Minutes passed, slow and quiet, the room filled with the sound of rain, steady, persistent. At last, Scout inched forward, nose quivering. He didn't make it far, but he didn't hide either. Claire talked to him, soft as the rain, telling stories about the ocean, about second chances, about dogs who'd learned to trust again. Maybe he understood, maybe not. But for the first time, his tail made a hesitant thump against the floor. It was nothing. It was everything. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives in small mercies, in breaths not held, in moments when fear loosens its grip. I can't help but wonder, how many of us are just waiting for someone to sit quietly beside us, to believe we're worth the effort? There were days Claire doubted herself. She'd leave the hospital exhausted, guilt gnawing at her for not being able to do more, for being too broken to help. But each morning, she came back. The nurses started calling her the loyal one. She smiled, but the truth was, loyalty was all she had left, and through it all, Scout kept fighting. He never stopped flinching at sudden movements. He never let anyone else touch him. But he watched Claire. He listened. Slowly, impossibly, he began to hope again. If you've ever loved something so wounded it hurt to watch, you'll know this truth. Real love isn't flashy, it's patient. It's the willingness to stay, to keep showing up, even when you're scared. That's what Claire did. And in that fragile, fearful place, a new story was beginning. A story not of rescue, but of mutual survival. The thing about coming home after a storm is, sometimes the quiet feels even heavier. That's what Claire discovered when the hospital finally cleared Scout for release. They called it a miracle, but anyone who's ever watched a scar form knows the truth. Healing isn't the end of pain, just the beginning of a new kind. You ever bring a wounded animal into your house? If you have, you'll know how the air seems to change, how the walls start holding their breath with you. Claire's apartment in Astoria was small and neat, filled with old army memorabilia and the salty scent of ocean air. When she carried Scout inside, his body tensed. Ears flat, tail tucked, paws scraping at the tile, as if he was searching for an escape route. There's a kind of fragility in a dog that's known too much darkness. Sometimes I wonder, Can a place ever truly feel safe again? Or do the ghosts always linger at the edges? The first night was brutal. Scout hid beneath the table, pressed tight against the wall. Claire left a bowl of water, some boiled chicken, and sat across the room with a book she couldn't read. The city outside throbbed with distant sirens, the hum of rain against the window, a lonely world spinning on. If you've ever tried to sleep with worry as your pillow, you'll understand how slowly the hours passed. But the sun always finds a way in. By morning, Scout had crept out just far enough to sniff at the food, hunger winning out over fear for a few trembling moments. Claire didn't move, didn't speak. Sometimes love means holding perfectly still. Of course, the world doesn't pause for your pain. News of Scout's rescue had made the local paper, buried puppy saved by veteran, and suddenly Claire's phone buzzed with calls, texts, even strangers knocking at her door. Some were kind, others less so. One night, someone threw a brick through her front window, scrawled, "Go back to where you came from," in the hallway. It's strange, isn't it? How cruelty breeds more cruelty. Why are we so quick to judge those who step into the fire, to punish the ones who refuse to look away? Claire taped the glass, swept up the shards, and went on with her day. She'd learned in the army how to live with threat humming just under her skin. What she hadn't learned, what Scout was teaching her, slowly, painfully, was how to live with hope. And in the quiet of her living room, there were victories, too small for headlines, but monumental for hearts that had been broken. Scout ate from Claire's hand for the first time. He flinched at her touch, but didn't bolt. That night, for the first time, he slept where she could see him, not hidden but exposed, trusting the dark wouldn't swallow him whole. You ever celebrate a win so small no one else would notice? Maybe it's just making it through a hard day, or hearing a friend laugh after weeks of silence. Those moments matter. They're the proof we all need, that light still gets in, even when shadows run deep. But the world outside wasn't done testing them. Police showed up at Claire's door one afternoon, their faces grim. They'd traced Scout's injuries back to a dogfighting ring operating out of a derelict warehouse on the edge of town. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one dog. It was a reckoning for the whole community. Claire found herself at the center of a story she never asked for. The detectives wanted her testimony, her memories of that morning on Cannon Beach, every detail she could recall about Scout's wounds, his collar, even the dirt under his paws. The press hounded her for interviews. Her neighbors watched from behind their blinds. Have you ever been forced to carry a truth bigger than you? It's a lonely thing. Claire answered their questions, handed over every scrap of evidence, and then retreated to the small world she and Scout had carved out of fear and patience. Meanwhile, the threats escalated. Someone spray-painted "snitch" on her car. She stopped answering the phone, closed her blinds, moved through her apartment in the half-dark. The courage it took to keep going, to not return Scout, to not shut out the world completely, wasn't something anyone could see. But it was real, and it was hard. And yet, in the midst of that chaos, something shifted. One rainy evening, as thunder rattled the windows and the lights flickered, Scout nudged his head onto Claire's knee. It was nothing and everything. The world outside could rage all it wanted. Here, in this small living room, trust was being rebuilt, heartbeat by fragile heartbeat. You ever wonder why we keep reaching for light, even when it burns? Maybe it's because deep down, we all know what it means to be afraid. Maybe we're just hoping someone will sit beside us in the dark. By the end of that week, the police had uncovered enough to move on the dogfighting ring. The story hit the news, real news this time, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Neighbors brought over casseroles. Someone left a stack of dog toys on Claire's porch. Kindness, tentative but real, bloomed in the cracks. But the work was far from done. Scout's nightmares didn't vanish. The scars, physical and invisible, remained. There were nights when Claire would find him trembling in his sleep, paws paddling as if running from old terrors. She'd sit with him in the dark, humming old songs, promising, in words and silence, that she wasn't going anywhere. Sometimes, healing isn't about forgetting the darkness. It's about learning to live with it, to chase the light even when it feels far away. And in that small apartment, with the rain tapping the window and the world outside learning, slowly, how to care. Claire and Scout fought their shadows, together. Sometimes it feels like the world tests you, just to see what you're willing to risk for something fragile. That was the lesson waiting for Claire as summer deepened in Astoria. Outside, the town carried on, fishing boats moving slow past the wharf, kids yelling from behind chain-link fences, the smell of salt and diesel hanging in the air. But inside Claire's apartment, life had shrunk to a tense, watchful routine. Every window checked, every lock double-tested, her phone on silent more than it rang. Scout was healing, but slowly. There were days when he'd greet Claire at the door with a cautious wag, eyes shining bright, and for a moment she could almost forget how much darkness he'd known. Then, sometimes for no reason she could see, he'd slip back, cowering at the sound of boots in the hallway, shaking at the slam of a door. If you've ever watched someone you love fight invisible battles, you'll know the helplessness that comes with it. You wonder, how much pain does it take before the mind trusts that the hurt is truly over? Meanwhile, the investigation pressed on. Claire became a reluctant key witness. She'd never thought of herself as brave. Not really. But courage isn't loud, not the way people think. Most of the time, it's saying yes to the next hard thing, even when you want nothing more than to disappear. That's the truth most never see. Police brought her down to the station more than once, walking her past walls lined with faces, some caught, some still at large. They wanted details, the way Scout's wounds had looked, every word she remembered from the frantic hours after the rescue. Sometimes Claire felt like she was unraveling her own scars right alongside his. I wonder, how many times can you bear witness to cruelty before it seeps under your skin for good? Word got out, as it always does in small towns. There were nights Claire could feel eyes on her in the grocery store, hear voices go quiet as she passed. "Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong," someone had whispered on her voicemail, the threat heavy and anonymous. Her hands shook as she deleted the message, but she refused to let it show. She wasn't about to let Scout see her fear. You ever ask yourself what you'd risk for justice? For the truth? Some people turn away, close their doors, and pretend it isn't their fight. But others, well, some people keep going, not because they're fearless, but because they're needed. Through it all, Scout began to change. There was a slow blossoming in him, as if trust and love had finally found a place to grow. He'd curl beside Claire's bed, paws twitching in sleep. In the mornings, when nightmares faded, he'd press his nose to her palm and breathe her in as if to make sure she was real. Sometimes, when she laughed, he'd tilt his head, confused at first, then tentatively wag his tail. There's a quiet joy in watching a soul rediscover the ordinary miracles of safety. But the threats kept coming. Claire started noticing unfamiliar cars parked outside her building, strangers lingering a little too long near her mailbox. One afternoon, a rock crashed through her kitchen window, glass exploding over the counter. The note tied to it was simple. Stay quiet. I have to admit, I don't know what I would have done in her place. Would I have packed up and left? Called someone for help? Or would I have doubled down like Claire did, cleaned up the mess, comforted Scout, and called the police again and again until her voice became a fixture at the station? Maybe the bravest thing isn't fighting back. Maybe it's just refusing to run. The police worked with what they had. They increased patrols in her neighborhood, installed a camera at her door, but the sense of being hunted lingered. You're in the middle of something big, the lead detective said, eyes tired but steady. We need you to hang on, Claire. This ring is bigger than we thought. It was during this time that Claire realized something had changed between her and Scout. It wasn't just the way he stuck close to her heels, or the way he seemed to read her moods. It was something deeper, a kind of partnership forged in adversity, the two of them drawing strength from one another's stubbornness. Sometimes, when she felt the old fear creeping in, Claire would sit on the floor beside Scout, her hand buried in his fur, and just breathe. For a while that was enough, but the danger was real, and not just for her. One night, returning from a late shift at the VA, Claire noticed her door slightly ajar. Her heart hammered as she crept inside, every instinct screaming at her to turn and run. The apartment was ransacked, drawers yanked open, photos smashed, Scout's food scattered across the kitchen tile. Scout himself was hiding under the bed, shaking but unharmed. Someone had been looking for something, or trying to send a message. She called the police. They took prints, made promises, but the world felt smaller after that. More brittle, the circle of trust narrowed down to just two. One woman, one dog, both scarred, both refusing to give up. In the darkest moments, Claire found herself talking to Scout, almost as if to convince herself. We're not running, she'd whisper. We're not giving them what they want, not this time. Some nights her voice shook, but Scout always listened, his eyes soft and unwavering. You ever wonder if dogs can sense when you need them more than they need you? Still, the investigation inched forward. Detectives uncovered more about the dogfighting ring. Names, places, a trail of cruelty winding through the town's underbelly. Each new revelation came with risk, but also with hope. For the first time, Claire felt the tide might be turning. Their bond, tested by threat and fear, became unbreakable, a testament to survival together. The world could rage all it wanted. Inside that battered apartment, courage was a choice, made quietly day after day. And in choosing not to back down, Claire and Scout stepped fully into the fire, risking everything, because to do less would be to betray not only each other, but every silent victim waiting for rescue. You know, people always think the real battle happens out in the open. Sirens, headlines, flashing lights. But most wars are fought in quiet places, behind closed doors, in the silent hours before dawn, or in the hearts of those who refuse to give up. Claire learned that lesson all over again as the investigation into the dog-fighting ring reached its boiling point. The police were ready to move. For weeks they'd been piecing together evidence, tracking late-night deliveries to the abandoned warehouse near the docks. Claire had given statement after statement, her memories replayed and picked apart until they felt like bruises she could never quite soothe. She didn't want to be the center of it, but she was. Her testimony, her willingness to stand her ground, was the missing piece. They set the sting operation for a night when the fog hung thick and heavy over Astoria, swallowing the streetlights and muffling every sound. Police vans waited in shadow, radios crackling softly. Officers crouched in rain-soaked alleyways, hands tense on their radios, every one of them hoping, this time, the monsters wouldn't slip through the cracks. And inside her apartment, Claire couldn't sleep. Scout paced restlessly, picking up on her anxiety. There's a way dogs look at you when you're scared, like they know, and they're carrying some of the weight for you. If you've ever had a companion like that, you'll know it's both a comfort and a sorrow, seeing your fear reflected back in their eyes. She tried to distract herself, tidying, folding laundry that didn't need folding, rereading the same page of a book over and over. But her mind kept drifting back to that warehouse, to the battered faces of dogs she'd glimpsed in the evidence photos. How many were waiting for rescue? How many wouldn't survive another night? A knock at the door made her jump. It was a police officer, Detective Rames, the one she'd come to trust. "You're safe here," he promised, voice low. "We've got a car outside all night." Claire nodded, but safety felt like a borrowed coat, never quite fitting, never truly hers. Somewhere past midnight, the call came through. The operation was on. Claire could only wait. She found herself kneeling on the floor, Scout's head in her lap, whispering words she barely believed. "They're going to end it tonight, boy. For you. For all of them." Her hands trembled, but Scout was calm now, leaning against her like he could anchor her to the moment. Minutes dragged. Every siren in the distance made her flinch. She thought about running, grabbing Scout and disappearing, leaving this mess behind. But she stayed. Would you have? Or would you have chosen the easier road, let someone else fight the hard fight? Down at the warehouse, chaos broke loose. Police swarmed the building, boots pounding on concrete, shouts echoing through the cavernous dark. The dogfighting ring's leaders tried to bolt, guns drawn, threats hurled into the gloom. But this time, the law was ready. In the confusion, one man slipped out the back, straight toward Claire's apartment. The officers outside saw him coming, but not before Scout pricked his ears, a low growl rising from his chest. Claire's heart hammered. The world narrowed to the sound of footsteps on the fire escape, the creak of metal, the slam of a fist against her door. "Stay back," she whispered, one arm around Scout, dialing 911 with the other. Scout barked, loud, defiant, the voice of a survivor who refused to cower any longer. The would-be intruder froze, startled by the fury in that single sound, and that hesitation was all it took for the officers to catch up. You ever wonder if bravery is the absence of fear, or the decision to act in spite of it? In that moment, Claire learned the truth. Her hands shook, tears stung her eyes, but she stood her ground. She'd carried Scout out of darkness once. Now it was his turn to protect her. The raid succeeded. Dozens of dogs were rescued, scarred, frightened, but alive. The ringleaders were hauled away in handcuffs, faces hard and empty. Reporters gathered, hungry for a headline. But for Claire, the victory felt quieter, more intimate. Back home, as dawn crept in over the water, Claire slumped onto the floor. Scout pressed close. She whispered, "We made it. You made it." He licked her hand, tail thumping weakly, as if he understood the world had shifted just a little toward the light. But even in triumph, The scars lingered. The news painted her as a hero. Veteran's courage breaks dogfighting ring. But Claire knew the truth. Heroes are just people who keep showing up, battered and afraid, refusing to let the darkness win. If you've ever been called brave when all you felt was tired, you'll understand. Sometimes I think about the dogs that didn't make it, about the ones still waiting. It's not enough to win once. The war is never really over. Every day, somewhere, someone is fighting to be seen, to be saved. You ever feel like the battle never ends? But for Claire and Scout, hope finally took root. For the first time in months, they slept through the sunrise. The apartment quiet except for the steady, peaceful rhythm of two survivors at rest. And in that silence, something new began. A world where kindness was stronger than cruelty, where loyalty, dog and human, could outlast even the deepest wounds. It's a strange thing, the way a single act of courage can echo outwards, changing lives, stirring up judgment, even inviting anger from places you'd never expect. When the story of Claire and Scout finally hit the headlines, it spread like wildfire, first in Oregon, then across the country. Some called it a miracle. Others, well, not everyone is kind to those who step into the light. Claire didn't seek attention. If anything, she wished the world would forget her name. But news vans started showing up at her building, cameras craning for a glimpse of the hero vet and her rescued dog. Reporters wanted interviews, politicians sent letters, animal welfare groups asked her to speak at rallies. Her mailbox filled with cards, gifts, even homemade dog treats. For a moment, Claire thought maybe the fight was over, that the world could be, at its best, a place that cared. But shadows move fast, too. It didn't take long for the online world to bare its teeth. Comment sections filled with accusations. It's fake. She staged it for attention. That dog's not even hers. There were threats, too. Cowards hiding behind usernames, demanding she recant, calling her every name but the one she'd earned. It's a hard truth, but even in victory, the world can be cruel. I wonder, how would you handle it? Would you fight back, shout your truth into the noise? Or would you close your doors, curl up with your scars, and try to wait out the storm? Claire tried to tune it out, but the words found their way in. At night, she'd sit by the window, Scout's head on her knee, watching headlights flicker across the wet street. She thought about the war, about friends who'd come home to parades but still felt unseen, untrusted. Sometimes being called a hero just makes the loneliness deeper. But out of all the noise, something unexpected happened. A counselor from the local VA clinic reached out. They'd seen the news and asked if Scout might visit. "Some of our veterans could use a friend," she said, "and maybe you could too." So, one chilly Tuesday, Claire and Scout walked into the VA. The halls were full of ghosts. Old soldiers, young ones, men and women with eyes that never quite met yours. There's a kind of silence in those places you don't find anywhere else. A heaviness made from years of loss, sacrifice, and battles no one else can see. Scout wore a little blue vest with therapy dog in training stitched on the side. At first he was nervous, keeping close to Claire, wary of the new smells and sounds. But something changed when he met the veterans. Maybe it was the way they moved. Slow, careful, carrying pain of their own. Maybe he recognized the same brokenness in them that he'd carried for so long. He let them pet him, even leaned in for the gentle hands, the rough voices saying, "Good boy, you made it." And in those small moments, tail thumping, heads bowed, A hand on his fur, something soft and human broke open. You ever witness a kind of healing that happens in silence? Not the showy kind, but the quiet recognition between two survivors. It's as if wounds become bridges, carrying us closer together, showing us we're not as alone as we thought. Word spread through the VA. Scouts coming today. Veterans who rarely spoke started asking about him, waiting by the door. Some brought treats, others just sat on the floor beside him, letting the warmth of his presence do what words couldn't. One old Marine, hands shaking, whispered, "Had a dog like you once. Got me through the worst of it." Scout licked his palm, and for the first time in weeks, the man smiled. Claire saw herself in these moments. The way pain can turn people into islands, and how sometimes all it takes is a single act of kindness to build a bridge back. I can't help but wonder, what would the world look like if we saw each other's wounds? Not as weakness, but as proof we'd survived? Not everyone believed. Online, the anger raged on. Some said Scout was just a tool, a symbol to make the world feel better about itself. Some accused Claire of chasing fame, of using his suffering for attention. It stung, in a way few things had before. But every day she saw Scout curl up beside a grieving veteran, she remembered why she'd chosen to stay, to fight, to keep showing up. Her own healing surprised her. Sitting in those sunlit halls, Claire found herself laughing more, talking to strangers, letting go bit by bit of the fear that had ruled her life. Scout, too, grew bolder, trusting new hands, greeting old friends. Their circle widened. The ripples spread. Some nights, Claire would drive home with Scout's head poking out the window, the salty air washing away another layer of sorrow. She'd think about how easily the world divides us, how quickly pain multiplies. But she'd also think about the strangers who'd stopped her on the street to say thank you, about the cards taped to her fridge, the quiet moments of connection that couldn't be undone. You ever feel the weight of both love and anger, hope and disappointment, pressing in at once? That's what it means to be seen in this world. To be praised and doubted, welcomed and scorned, all for the same truth. But in the end, Claire learned to let the noise fade, to hold tight to the moments that mattered. Scout, asleep at her feet, a veteran's soft thank you, the sense that, just maybe, the worst had passed. And at the heart of it all was the simple, stubborn fact that kindness, even battered and bruised, is its own kind of victory. If you've ever lost something, someone, or some piece of yourself, you'll know that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the scar, letting it change you, and maybe in time, finding the strength to show that scar to the world. That's the lesson Claire began to live by, as the weeks after the raid gave way to the slow return of ordinary days. Life never did go back to normal. The apartment still hummed with tension sometimes, but there was laughter now too, and the warmth of a dog asleep on the rug, chasing quiet dreams. Scout's nightmares didn't vanish, but he woke with fewer jolts, and sometimes, when the light was just right, you could see a kind of peace in his one good eye. The city moved on, new headlines, new scandals, but for Claire and Scout, healing meant something quieter. It was in the small rituals, morning walks along the damp, pebbled shore, coffee sipped on the fire escape as Scout basked in a patch of sun. There were still people who stared, who whispered. Sometimes the past felt like a shadow stretching out behind them. But Claire had learned to let the world keep its noise. What mattered most now lived inside 4 small walls and in the hearts of those willing to stay. She found herself returning to the VA, not out of obligation, but out of something closer to gratitude. There, among other survivors, the weight of her story felt lighter. She saw the way Scout would press his head into a veteran's hand, how the men and women who rarely spoke found their voices around him. If you've ever witnessed pain become a kind of kinship, you'll understand why those rooms mattered more than anything she'd won or lost in battle. One afternoon, a young man, barely out of high school, eyes haunted, sat cross-legged beside Scout. He didn't say much, just scratched the dog's ear and stared out the window. Later, the nurse would tell Claire that he hadn't spoken in days, not since he'd been discharged. "Scout's good with the silent ones," she whispered. "Maybe because he knows what it means to lose your voice." I wonder, have you ever found comfort in someone who doesn't ask you to explain? Sometimes what saves us isn't words, but presence. The promise that, broken as we are, we still belong. Over time, Claire started seeing her scars differently. There were moments when she'd catch herself tracing the faded lines on her arms or the old bullet wound on her leg, and remember the pain. Yes, but also the people who'd stood by her in the aftermath. Pain, she realized, could be a bridge, if you let it. And Scout, for all his fears, became her daily teacher. He didn't hide his limp or his blindness. He met the world head-on, tail wagging, never apologizing for his damage. Watching him, Claire wondered how much time she'd wasted trying to seem fine, to erase the evidence of her own survival. Maybe, she thought, the world needs more reminders that you can be hurt and still be whole. Sometimes, people would stop Claire on the street. "Is that the dog from the news?" they'd ask, their faces flickering between curiosity and admiration. Some wanted the story, others just wanted to pet Scout, to touch a piece of hope made real. Claire learned to smile, to let them have their moment. She understood now. The story wasn't just hers or Scout's. It belonged to everyone who'd ever loved something broken and hoped it might heal. Still, there were setbacks. Days when Scout would freeze at a loud noise, or Claire would find herself back in the grip of old nightmares. Healing, she learned, wasn't a ladder you climbed out of the darkness, but a path you wandered, sometimes forward, sometimes back. Late one night, after a particularly hard day, Claire sat on the floor with Scout, her hand buried in his fur. "I don't know if I'm getting better," she whispered, "but I think I'm learning how to stay." He leaned into her, eyes half closed, as if to say, "Staying is enough." It's easy to look for meaning in the big moments, the headlines, the victories, the applause. But in the end, Claire found it was the quiet choices that mattered most. The decision to show up, to keep loving, to stay gentle with yourself and the world, even when it's easier to go numb. What can we learn from Claire and Scout? That true healing doesn't erase scars. It gives them purpose. Pain, shared and faced, can build bridges instead of walls. And love isn't about being unbroken. It's about showing up, wounded and real. If you've ever felt alone, truly alone, as if no one could understand the weight you carry, I hope you'll remember this. Kindness, even from a stranger, can reach deeper than you imagine. Sometimes all it takes is a single act, a hand offered, a dog's steady gaze, to remind us we still belong. America is full of lonely souls. Some hide their pain in crowded rooms. Others let it show on quiet streets. But every act of courage, every moment of care, sends out ripples, unseen but felt. For every cruelty, there can be resistance. For every wound, a chance for meaning. That's the lesson Claire's story left me with, and maybe with you too. Picture this. Cannon Beach at sunrise, the same stretch of sand where everything once went wrong, and in the end, where it all began to heal. The fog rolls in, pale gold and violet, lapping at the driftwood and the seagrass, carrying the first promise of a day that feels lighter than those that came before. I wonder if you were there. Would you have felt the shift in the air? The sense that sometimes, just sometimes, broken things can come full circle. Scout runs ahead, his shadow long on the wet sand, scars gleaming in the early light. He runs not like a survivor, but like a conqueror. Ears up, tail waving, nose to the wind. If you've ever watched an animal reclaim joy, you'll know it's a kind of victory words can't quite capture. His limp is still there, of course. The missing eye. But none of that seems to matter now, not with the whole world wide open before him. Claire stands a little distance away, boots planted in the soft sand, hands tucked in her pockets. She's not alone this time. All around her are faces, some familiar, some new. Fellow veterans, old neighbors, a few nurses from the animal hospital, even the detective who first believed her story. They stand in a loose circle, laughter and small talk rising like a signal fire, warming the chill of morning. I have to admit, when I look at scenes like this, I wonder, who has rescued whom in the end? Was it Claire who saved Scout, or Scout who carried Claire back to herself? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe rescue is never a one-way street. There's a moment when the group grows quiet, each person watching Scout as he skids to a halt and dashes back toward Claire. He pauses in front of her, panting, one paw muddy, and she kneels down to meet him. Their eyes lock, woman and dog, both marked by what they've survived, both changed by what they've chosen. If you've ever felt that connection, the kind that goes deeper than words, you'll know it's a kind of homecoming. Claire presses her forehead to Scout's, and the world seems to fade away just for a second. The past is still there, trailing behind like footprints in the sand. But for this moment, at least, it doesn't hurt so much. Someone starts a slow clap, and laughter breaks out. The veterans share stories, some funny, some hard, all honest. The community, once fractured by fear and suspicion, seems stitched together by this simple act. A gathering to celebrate survival, to bear witness to what it means to choose hope, over and over. A little girl asks if she can pet Scout. He hesitates, then lets her stroke his back, her small fingers tracing the lines where fur doesn't grow. "Does it hurt?" she whispers. Claire smiles, brushing the girl's hair aside. "Not anymore," she says. And maybe that's true, for both of them. Later, as the sun climbs higher and the crowd drifts away, Claire lingers on the beach, watching Scout explore every inch of the world that once tried to swallow him whole. She thinks about all the people who stepped up when it mattered, the vet who stayed late, the neighbor who brought soup, the strangers who sent letters of encouragement, and sometimes just silence that said, "I see you, and I believe you." She also remembers the darkness, the threats, the vandalism, the voices that tried to convince her none of it was worth the risk. And maybe, in a way, those things mattered too. Because without the fight, the healing would have meant less. Without the fear, courage wouldn't taste so sweet. I want to ask you, does healing ever truly end? Or is it something we pass from one heart to another, a little stronger each time? Can a single act of compassion really ripple outward, changing more than we'll ever see? I think so. Watching Claire and Scout, seeing how their story reached across pain and doubt to draw others in, I can't help but believe it's true. The world is full of wounds, most of them invisible. But for every act of cruelty, there's a chance, however small, for someone to push back. For every soul that's been buried, there's someone somewhere willing to dig. Maybe as you finish listening to this story, you'll look a little closer at the scars, on your own heart, or on someone else's. Maybe you'll remember that broken things aren't worthless. In fact, they're often the proof of survival, the roadmap to empathy. With me, this isn't just a story about a rescued dog. It's a lesson about second chances and about how love, real love, isn't afraid of the dark. It's the kind of love that waits and listens and keeps coming back, even when the world says give up. If you're lucky enough to have a friend at your side, a dog, a person, anyone who's stayed through your worst nights, go ahead and hold them close. None of us gets through this life alone. And if this story touched you, maybe you'll reach out to a pet, a person, a stranger who needs a hand. Because that's how the circle widens. That's how we build a kinder world, one act at a time. Like follow and share if you believe in second chances. Every story matters. Every scar has a place. And every dawn, no matter how dark the night before, deserves to be witnessed.